Welcome, everyone. This is the Monday, June 2nd meeting of the Governance and Ethics Committee meeting. I need to read this statement about Zoom. This meeting will be recorded. The Zoom application will notify you that this meeting is being recorded. Please press continue on the Zoom application to stay in the meeting. Use the raise your hand feature in Zoom when you would like to speak on an item, and also to lower your hand when you're finished speaking. Please unmute when called to speak and mute yourself when you are done speaking. If you're calling in by phone, identify yourself by name before speaking on an item. Press *9 on your phone to raise and lower your hand. Press *6 if you're participating by phone to unmute. So I would now like to call this meeting to order at 10:10 a.m. Maria, I believe Councilmember Park is running late.
Yes, Committee Member Park
like
just
to-
notified us he's on his way.
Would you like to do the roll call?
Committee Member Shahal, Committee Member Jane,
Here.
okay, and as noted, Committee Member Park is on his way. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can just proceed with the consent calendar and public presentations. We have one item on our consent calendar, item 1A, approval of the May 1st, 2025 Governance and Ethics Committee special meeting minutes. Is there a motion? Or
So Chair, I wasn't in that meeting, but
oh, here.
I have gone through the
Councilmember
minutes.
Park is here. Let the record note that Councilmember Park has arrived. And Councilmember Park, we did roll call already. Now we'll reflect that you're here, but we're at the consent calendar, which is the meeting minutes of May 1st, 2025. And Councilmember Chahal or Member Chahal was not present at that meeting. Is there a motion?
I will make a motion. We'll make a motion to approve the minutes. for the
Okay,
consent calendar.
All right. Any member of the public would like to weigh in on this?
We do have a hand raised.
Okay.
Hi, Wanda. Would you like to say?
Good morning. Good morning. Wanda Buck. Just one city citizen here. I'm wanting in a positive way to help and follow up on your agreement to form a separate ethics committee or commission in 2025. It would be such a positive and ethical action.
Wanda,
Can't hear me?
we're on the meeting minutes right now. Public
Oh, I'm
presentation will
sorry.
Start soon.
I
We were
will
just, if you had a comment on the meeting minutes.
I'm sorry. I will repeat later.
Okay, no worries.
I lowered my
Okay.
head.
So we have a motion. All in favor? Aye.
As per city attorney, I can participate, so I'll vote.
Okay.
I've gone through the.
Opposed? Seeing none, passes unanimously. All right, now we're on to public presentations. Wanda, would you like to speak on this?
Yes, I'm so sorry. And again, good morning. Just one city citizen here, Wanda Buck, wanting in a positive way to help and follow up on your agreement to form a separate ethics committee or commission in 2025. It would be such a positive and ethical action to show you can do what you said would do. It is concerning that ethics are not enough of a priority to be on the agenda today for whatever reasons. Perhaps a separate ethics committee consisting of more than just council could be formed to study a work plan and goals. The mayor and council would still have approval on proposals. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, any other members? Okay, I would like to maybe have our city manager or city attorney weigh in on the status of an ethics commission. I know we have hired a consultant.
Yes. So in a few of your prior meetings, you received an update on the work that the consultant is doing. I believe it's
Liebert Cassidy Whitmore is the consultant, and that is next scheduled. They're currently doing 2 scopes of work. It is on your work plan for the September 8th meeting to review and finalize the ethics documents, and then receive an update on the work and the options around establishing a ethics commission. And so previous direction, consultant brought on board, committee updated a few meetings ago, and scheduled for what I think will be a presentation of the analysis and findings, and potentially action from this body in September.
Okay, thank you for that update. City Attorney, do you have anything to add? Okay, all right, now, is no other members of the public? Okay.
No other hands
We
raised.
can move on to general business. We have one item of general business. It's item number 2 on the agenda, review and approval of amendments to council policy 035, naming of facilities. So do we have a staff presentation on this?
We do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, members of the committee, Chair Jane, Committee Member Park, and Committee Member Jahal. We have a PowerPoint. You have a staff report with a number of attachments. Also, here today is Damon Sparacino, our Director of Parks and Recreation, who had a very significant hand in bringing you the documents that are before you today, as well as Maria Lay, our Assistant to the City Manager. We'll begin with the presentation on this item. So as the council may know, next slide, the City Council has a policy 035 that establishes the criteria and procedures for naming city facilities to ensure that naming decisions are made in an equitable and consistent manner. Council Policy 25 is called naming of facilities. It was last reviewed by this committee in March of 2023 with some approved amendments going to the City Council, being authorized by the City Council in October. Additionally, to further define criteria and provide consistent procedures for naming for cities' streets, we're proposing amendments for your consideration in this policy. Next slide. The Governance Committee, as you know, was established in February of 2019. And as a reminder, that was really a consolidation of a number of committees. It was a consolidation of the Governance Committee. It was a consolidation of the Ethics Committee, and also consolidation of the naming, Facilities Naming and Honorary Recognition Ad Hoc Committee. And so it is very much in your purview around naming of city facilities. Also important to note, our Historical Landmarks Commission, HLC, acts as an advisory body to the City Council. They also have oversight per the charter pertinent to naming of historical landmarks, streets, museums, and establishing historic preservation markers. Important to note, HLC has charter guidance, but they do not have a policy to guide their work. There are practices that have been in place that we'll talk a little bit about. And so as a part of the proposed amendments that we're proffering to you is to really wrap up their process within Council Policy 35 that will articulate how they accomplish their purview as identified in the charter. So next slide, just want to talk about the proposed amendments. So one, there's just a very basic title change we're recommending. So revise the title to include the naming and process for streets to be included. So the policy will be naming of city streets, parks, and other facilities. The role of the HLC is proposed to include language that regards the HLC's process for naming streets and other facilities. And then we are adjusting some of the criteria that we will discuss now. Next slide. These first few slides recap the current criteria that is within Council Policy 035. Existing criteria for commemorative naming is geographic location, demographic information, prominent environmental features of the area, in the building or facility where it is located should be considered. Important to note, individuals can be living or deceased. And they must have made outstanding contributions to the city of Santa Clara, the state, or an international significance. So it's just not limited to someone locally. Honoring important contributions and accomplishments of individuals from underrepresented communities is another guideline. Next slide. A guideline is that naming can provide an opportunity to foster a more welcoming, equitable, and inclusive environment, as well as reflect, connect to the city's diverse community. And then E, can be a naming rights agreement that may provide financial benefit to the city with sponsorships or naming rights agreements for city-owned facilities, which aligns to the city's mission and value. So now talking about the proposed amendments, we would like to add a few additional guidelines. One is consideration of names with common or historical usage, such as we have streets that are clustered around U.S. presidents as a criteria that would be weighted. The individual or organization must have demonstrated outstanding achievements, contributions, and/or enrichments to the city. And the contribution of the person being honored must have been extraordinary, significant, or unique, setting this individual apart from others in the community. And this may be evidenced by documented history of the individual's contributions or receipt of recognitions or awards. Next slide. The individual being honored by the dedication or naming has had a direct and long-term association with a feature or facility, such as it could be the developer. Sometimes a facility could be named after the developer. We could also consider in this proposal the donor of the land, a person who played a large part in protecting the land or a feature for public benefit, also a person who played a large part in providing community services through the feature facility. Common thing like that is if you have a rec center and there was a long-term employee at that rec center, naming it after that person. Where applicable, permission should be sought from the individual's surviving family or next of kin. Donation, deed of land or facility, if negotiated or otherwise required as a condition of the property's donation, a naming requirement for a park or facility shall be honored, although a geographic or characteristic name is preferred. Next, naming names that are similar to existing streets, parks, facilities, or other properties should be avoided to minimize confusion. The city should avoid changing street names along any continuous alignment. Additional proposed amendments are this incorporates the HLC process. So HLC currently maintains a list of approved names. The list would be used for consideration for any facilities, parks, or streets, and the list would be updated annually by the city council as desired. Another important change is that we would like to require 2 names be submitted to this body. So whether it comes from HLC or the Park and Rec Commission, in order to give the body options, at least 2 names, but no more than 3 names. And then lastly, providing for unique circumstances. And we recently had one where there was an employee that was sick and desired to name after that person before they passed. And so this policy also creates a carve out where for unique instances, a recommendation can be made by the city manager or by council through a 030 request and have that go directly to the city council. Next slide. This table provides an overview of the process where if it is a park and recreation facility, there will be public input at the Park and Recreation Commission. That then will go to the governance committee with 2 or 3 options, and then governance will make a recommendation that will go to the city council. HLC, currently their practice, and we did not propose to change this, but it's something that the committee may consider. Because they are an advisory body to the city council, their practice has been that any of their recommendations go straight to the council. And what's before you, that doesn't change. What does change is that they should provide the council with 2 to 3 options. So if the committee desired, you could change that where to align it with any other facility where that recommendation would come here, and then this committee would make the final decision or recommendation to proceed to council. And then any other committees, HLC will review options with a community process, and that will come to this committee with 2 to 3 options. And then so that concludes the summary of the presentation. I know, Damon, if you have anything to add. Drafting the power.
Nothing to add at this time. However, if there's any questions or discussion, I'm happy to help either Jovan or the committee. Where needed.
Important to note, all of those criteria, you don't have to meet all of them. You can simply meet one. And then, so it's not like you have to check each and every box. It's meet one and it's allowed. To move forward.
Are there any questions of my fellow committee members? Okay, member.
So I know, city manager, you mentioned that HLC goes directly to the council versus other processes we are moving through ethics and governance and ethics. Why not do directly to the council? Why you are choosing one over the other? Like, I know the president, you did mention that HLC president has been directly, but why not Park and Rec also directly to them?
If I might add to that, because it ties back into the ordinance that talks about Historic Lands Commission. There is language in, it's actually not charter, it's code section 2.120.100 that talks about the Historic Landmarks Commission and their responsibility to act in an advisory capacity to the city council with respect to historic landmarks, names and renaming of streets, museums, and other things. And the pattern in practice, I think reasonably interpreting that, section has had those recommendations going directly to council, because it doesn't say they're advisory. Ethics Commission, it says they're advisory. So it could, as the city manager mentioned, it would be possible to change that. If you were going to recommend a change to that, I would recommend some clarifying language, in the ordinance as well, so that the Governance and Ethics Committee, if you want to maintain, your status, and increase it in this case to cover all recommendations from these other committees, revising that language to make that clear would be my recommendation. So I think it's been how this provision has been interpreted. The fact that this language exists at all and how it's been interpreted in the past.
Rather, I was going other way around, like even the Park and Rec Commission is advisory to the council. So I was thinking, if HLC goes directly to the council, why not Park and Rec recommendation also go to the council direct instead of coming to governance and adding another layer of work basically for the staff as well as for the committee? That was my question.
It's a good question. The primary purpose is so there's another vetting of the name before it goes directly to the city council. So for example, if one of the names is controversial, or if there's a preference to name a facility after someone versus someone else, that's not worked out at the city council level. It's worked out at governance. And so that's part of the reason why having up to 3 options is desired. And this committee, I think, has the ability to ask more questions and go a little deeper and make a single recommendation to the city council.
I could add to that too, getting back to what the code says. Unlike the historic, I always double clutch on that name because it's a funny name, Historical and Landmarks Commission, which has that explicit language regarding naming. Parks and Rec Commission does not. And so that's probably part of why it's been handled differently in the past. Historical Landmarks has more explicit language regarding them being advised by council on.
Okay,
Member Park?
Actually, I have a number of questions based on that as well, which is, what was the role of the Facilities Naming and Honorary Recognition Ad Hoc Committee? I mean, it seems like there was a committee there before, and if it says Facilities Naming and Honorary Recognition, I would think that that would have also had input from HLC in, most cases. I mean, I don't see, because again, governance and ethics is kind of an amalgam of 3 different committees, and it comprises only council members. I don't see how it would be inconsistent to have even HLC go to governance and ethics for exactly the reasons that city manager brought up, which is this committee has the ability to ask more questions, go deeper, gives a little bit more discussion background, especially for controversial items. But I guess what was the role of Facilities Naming and Honorary Recognition Ad Hoc Committee, and how, what kinds of names came before that committee?
That history, I'll turn to Maria Lay. I know that they were an ad hoc committee and they would meet periodically when there was a facility naming issue, but as far as their process.
I do not actually have all the details to how long or when they were established. I do know that in 2019, the efforts were made because there were so many ad hocs and separate committees to consolidate. I would have to check with the clerk's office to just get the true details to when the ad hoc for the naming was established and how long they were using that. But my understanding, it was on an as-needed basis.
Okay. So that said, I mean, I have some questions about the presentation. You talk about number of options for naming recommendations, and I was trying to take a look. What does that actually mean? Maybe it's one or both, but number of names for a place or feature, or number of things to be named in case we have a name in mind already. I just want a little bit of clarification there.
Sure. So the way the process has been and the way it's envisioned is that this committee would not be the committee that generates the initial name or even the concept for a facility to be named after an individual. But this committee would be the vetting body. And so when a facility has proposed to be named, whether it's a park and recreation facility, a historic, or one of the facilities under the purview of the HLC, in one version, those would come to this committee with 2 or 3 options. And this committee would.
My question is, options for what? Options for names for a place to be named, or options for streets, features in the case that we have a name that we would really like to use. For example, I mean, those are two slightly different things, which is like we have a geographic feature we would like to name. In that case, we have one feature and we would bring options for names. In another case, we have a name. We have somebody we would like to honor, and we would like to use this name someplace, but we don't know if this should be a street, should be a geographic feature, should be a museum. Like, I just want to clarify. It's all those things.
So what it has been and what it's proposed to be is the actual name coming to the body. There is the annual list that HLC maintains that a council member could suggest a name go on that list, but as currently envisioned, it's the actual thing to be named.
As opposed to a name.
Yeah. Yeah, anybody could bring a name at any time to historic landmarks or parks and recreation and or council for that matter, but there's nothing to be named.
I see.
If there's nothing to be named, the naming, the names would have to go through that process and make sure that it hits the list to, like the different, it meets the criteria to be added to the list for a future facility. And conversely, if we bring, say we're naming a park and we do a public process and we get more than 3 names recommended to the Parks and Recreation Commission, we can present all names to the Parks and Rec Commission as long as they meet the criteria. Parks and Rec will take out of a 10-name potential list that meets the criteria outlined in the policy. Parks and Rec would give 3 to this committee, and then this committee would give either rank order or 1 to council, but as part of the report, it would show the 3 that were brought forward. Now, all those names that were not put forward for naming of any one facility can be parked, if you will, and or added to the city's master list on an annual basis. You could say, hey, these names meet our criteria, we're voting on them. We'd like to make sure that these are added to the HLC's master list, but we're not selecting, we're selecting this one at this time. So we need to refine a little bit on how the list process goes at the HLC level, but that's not necessarily pertinent to the naming of a facility. It's how do we generate, maintain, and keep that particular list, which would be a separate process and it would be a part of HLC.
And then I guess the question is, when I look at the naming of streets, HLC reviews naming options, which may include community outreach process. So at some point, we've decided that something should be named and we're looking for the name. Right. At what point can HLC, given the language that city attorney read, at what point can the HLC decide on their own that we would like something to be named? Like who determines what should be that we would like something to be named? Right. I mean, when we had the facilities and naming ad hoc committee, I would think that something happened to create the ad hoc for this naming facility, this facilities and naming group to meet.
Yeah, so in that instance, it would be the unique circumstance that was brought up by City Manager Grogan, where if it was a staff initiated process, it can go directly to either the city manager's office and or to this committee. The other way is, for instance, we have a room, it's never been named, and we wanted to name it for something. It would go through the normal process. It could be initiated by staff, community, or council, or committee. Go ahead.
Let me take that. A couple different ways, right? Most common, we're bringing a new facility online. And so staff would bring that either to HLC or Parks and Rec Commission, and then that would make its way through the process. This policy also provides for urgent situations where it can come from council to initiate through a 030, or it can come from the city manager. I don't know if this has occurred here, but there's also, in theory, the possibility for someone on HLC to bring up an idea working with the staff member assigned to HLC if it is not otherwise coming up from staff because we're bringing on a new facility. And so I think an example of that is we have a plaza in the Civic Center that doesn't have a name, right? And so someone in the community or someone on council says, we should name that after X. Unless council wants to start it as a 030, the most logical place is for it to start at HLC or Parks and Rec if it's a facility. I don't know if that's ever happened in our history, but that certainly would be the best originating spot.
Okay, and from the public, the only way that public would initiate, they can never initiate directly. They would go to HLC and and ask HLC to bring it forward, or they would work with a council member for an 030 request, but there is no direct way for a public to say, well, we would like to talk about this.
I actually think that is the direct way, right? The public could go.
Well, that's the way that we've defined, correct, is, that's,
Well, I mean, the public could go to their elected official. They could send it in through manager or somehow staff. Or they could go to one of the various advisory bodies, in this case, the Parks and Rec Commission or HLC. And so those are really the three pathway for the public. And for example, if something came in directly to staff, we would likely send that to the committee.
understood. So it's actually not my final comment. I've got some more. But when I think about the Governance and Ethics Committee, and when I see that it is actually a consolidation of three committees, Governance, Ethics, Facilities Naming and Honorary Recognition Ad Hoc Committee, I have to think, why did we consolidate those three? We heard from Maria that there's a number of ad hoc committees, and we wanted to kind of consolidate rather than have ad hoc committees for everything that came forward, have a central committee that different items could come to. That's what it sounds like to me. But it makes me think that, like Facilities Naming and Honorary Recognition Ad Hoc Committee, so whenever an issue came up, but for Governance, Ethics, if we had both of those committees, I would think that the frequency of those committees would be higher if we added both meetings together than the frequency of the Governance and Ethics Committee. I would think that the Governance Committee met once a quarter and the Ethics Committee met once a quarter, then they would have 8 meetings a year. And I feel that we've combined those. We've made comments about the length of the Governance and Ethics Committee, but when I think about it, for the frequency that we meet, maybe those meetings need to be twice as long. Maybe the issues that we bring up here need to be a little bit more full. I mean, I'm kind of looking at the agenda for today's meeting, thinking this is the only thing that's on here, and we have so many other things on our list of governance and ethics. We have so many items to consider. So I'm making that comment because this is coming out in this presentation, that the history and the history of the Governance and Ethics Committee. We talked about a number of other things about how we do naming, donors. I guess my questions are, when would we refuse a donation? Are there guidelines for what we accept or don't accept? Would we accept a donation from Kim Jong-un, for example? Are there conditions that we would not agree to? If Kim Jong-un wanted to give a donation and said he wanted, the name his name to be prominently displayed, what do we say no to? I don't know that there are conditions for this. I mean, at some point, I would like to say, if you make a donation, we would acknowledge you, but you don't get to choose how we acknowledge you, just to keep things. We'd like a donation to be a donation, but in many cases, donations for this express purpose of having a facility named after you are not donations. That's marketing. Right. I'll
like to respond. So what's in the policy is that the donation would need to align to the city's mission and values. That said, we do not have explicit donation criteria within the policy. What would happen if there was a proposed donation is that there would be a staff analysis of that. That would go to the committee. We would do that based on, does it align to the city's mission and values? Given the uniqueness of the donation, there may be some specific considerations that we also articulate in the staff report, but we would take that to the committees, Parks and Rec Commission or HLC, and then ultimately that would either come here or to the city council if HLC continues to go straight to the city council.
again, it goes to my donations with the express requirement for naming. I mean, I know that that occurs in the private sector, lots of other places, but for a city, that kind of sounds like marketing. And I almost feel that, well, I do feel this, that if there's going to be a donation to the city, it should be a donation. We will recognize the people who donated in a way, but you know, you don't get to determine how that is. Like if you donate land, we will put a plaque that can talk about donation. We can have a proclamation that talks about donation, but saying that any building, any facility built here must have that name on it. I don't know that jives with me in my mind about donations.
And I would agree with that. Know that the policy doesn't say that, but it certainly allows for the possibility that if someone wanted to donate property to the city, as a part of that donation, they requested to have a certain name, the city could vet and consider that. And so what the policy does is provide the possibility for that to be a criteria for the name is donated land. For example, I profess I don't know the history of the Harris Last House, right? But you could imagine a historic property in Santa Clara and someone saying, I would like to donate this historic property to the city of Santa Clara, but I would like it named after my family because of the historic significance of this property, like, for example, the Morris Mansion, right? If that was currently under ownership of the Morris family and they said we would like to donate that to the city, but one of our criteria is that it's forever called Morris Mansion, this policy allows for us to consider that and vet that and say, you know, we are accepting of the donation and we'll abide by your request.
Again, I mean, you're saying that there is no explicit, you're saying it's a possibility. It's a one of many things that can be considered. And if we're going to make guidelines, I'd kind of like to make those guidelines more explicit. And again, I would like to make donation as a possible criteria for naming. Like, you know, we have, you know, I mean, in the private sector, my problem is anyone with money can put their name on something by donating a lot of money. This is what happens in universities where people put names on facilities. And I kind of feel that for a city, okay.
Side conversation.
Okay, I know that when I'm talking and it's harder for me to listen, so I'm trying to be a little bit respectful to your need to talk.
So I'm sorry, in response to that, I just wanted to, what we're talking about, relevant to your point, to be responsive to it, is that this policy is not a policy that determines whether or not the city will accept a donation and the criteria upon which it would accept a donation. Ultimately, that will be for the city council to decide one way or the other. All this policy on that is saying is that if in fact it is determined that the city will accept, you know, a donation, and a criteria for that is that the thing being donated will be named, you know, after somebody, that will be a criteria for determining what its name would be. That's different than whether or not we would accept the donation or not. So in deciding whether or not to accept the donation, the city and ultimately the city council will decide, do we want this thing from this person? And would we accept that as a condition to the donation? This just says, and I think we can add some clarifying language to make it crystal clear, that's all it says, that if in fact a donation is made and and it's accepted and we've determined, and one of the conditions to that, or one of the negotiated things for that, is that the thing being donated will be named after the person donating it, or whatever they've decided the name would be. That is also a factor that will determine under the naming of that thing what the name would be. So it's, I wouldn't, it's easy to conflate the idea of whether or not we'd accept a donation with what the name would be. This is not intending to do that. That's a separate decision.
And I understand and appreciate the difference, but I'm saying that we probably need guidelines on both, on acceptance of donations and on requirements that can be added to a
Yeah,
donation
fair.
that's given.
I think that's fair. I don't know what those other, there may be some that I'm not familiar with that we have already or a pattern in practice for that. I think that's a fair point. And I'm going to add as part of this, just to be crystal clear about that, that this doesn't mean that. And then we can take up the donation, I think, probably separately.
We can provide the committee with the city's guidelines and policies on donations. I'm at the moment, we're recalling one policy where that if money is donated, there's a requirement to notify the city council. And so we can collect all of our various donation policies and submit that to the committee. And should the committee like us as a part of the work plan to look into that, certainly we can do so. I would say, again, just reiterating, the various criteria in here provide for guidelines when we're saying, okay, it is possible to name that facility for that purpose or after that person because it meets one of the various criteria outlined. Donation being allowed is what's offered. Totally understand that what you're articulating is wanting to understand our donation rules or our donation guidelines and potentially wanting more definition on what those are once you see that. So we can certainly provide that.
Because we have a list of names already, it sounds like. And what you're saying is for a public facility or for a city feature, money can allow you to jump the queue. And I think that sits very, very poorly with me.
Yeah, I would just say that's not what's intended here at all.
But that's what's allowed.
Well, what's intended is to provide the council ultimately in this committee with flexibility. And so certainly there is envision and there is an annual list that will continue to be maintained. But if something comes forward and someone says, I would like to donate this historic property to the city of Santa Clara, my one request is that you call it, for example, Morris Mansion, right? And because it's historically connected to the Morris family, it allows the council and the committees to consider that and say, you know what? That's an allowed use for naming. We may not get this facility that we think is of value otherwise. And so we're okay with that. It really just provides flexibility.
But what I'm saying is that council already has the ability to name whatever they want. At some point, the guidelines, I would hope, are for people who are looking to make donations, looking to have names associated with features. You know, and if we don't have that, then the fact that council can decide whatever they want, that has always been the case. But when we're looking at, and I look at to further define criteria and provide consistent procedures for name proposals for city streets, like I would think one of that starts with the people providing even donations to the city. I would think that without guidelines even there, that's a big loophole to basically go around the standard process of needing to be historically significant with HLC, with Parks and Rec, with any other consideration.
Understand that point. To provide another example, and this may very well align to reasons why you may not want donations included. There could also be a development. And as a part of that development, the city would like to have ownership to a street because it has certain benefits to city facilities. And the developer could negotiate for having that street named after the development. So this policy allows for that. I totally understand what you're saying, which is you're not in favor of that process, and you would rather the annual list to be the list of names that are chosen from, and not have the donation or the person that's property be able to, as defined in the policy, offer up their own name.
Understood. Like I mean, an example of this, I mean, across the hearth complex near Central Park. When Fairfield Residential came to propose that, I was one of the biggest people who complained against it. I represented my neighborhood in saying these are the changes we'd like to make. And Fairfield Residential basically said no. And in order to try to, I guess, get my support, they said, hey, what if we named a street after you? And even though, because it's like we can name our private streets, nice. And even though I thought having a park drive or even a park with a park parking lot would have been very interesting, we don't have anything like that because my answer was no. Doesn't sound like the right thing to do. Like we're not going to turn down what we believe in to get something we don't want. And in this case, we don't even have language that says there are things that we don't want. Meaning at some point we have a list. Seems like that list exists because we don't have enough things to name. And the fact that people can offer money or corporations can offer money to jump that list doesn't sit right. I think that everything should go through some kind of review. And that review shouldn't be just on how much money did they give? You know, what benefit do they give to the city? Donations especially. Like if donations are for the express purpose of marketing for naming, that's not really a donation, that's a payment.
Are you specific? Be specific. Are you talking about number 9 within this bulleted list or 8? Because 9 is expressly tied to property, donation or deed, but 8 has naming rights and agreements for financial benefit, sponsorship, but 9 is tied directly to the property. So like they're going to donate a house or open space. Maybe they own some land that never was developed, which is there's less and less of that in Santa Clara, but and said we would like it to be named this. And then if that is the one that you're speaking to, number 9, is there some suggested language on either 8 or 9 that we could add to the policy that would be in alignment with what you're assuming to protect us as the city from?
Yeah, for example, if you have a prominent city feature, whether it's a geographic location, a park, a museum, a facility, that implies a little bit of, you know, city support, that we agree with this, that there is some city significance with this. If somebody donates land and it's tied to a family, right, and that family is not the family that donated the property, then I think that should go through a little bit of HLC, some review. That should go through a review. It should not be that I can donate a historically significant house and attach my name to it because I was the person that donated it.
So could we sharpen this area up? One, there's some other language within this particular policy that mentions that, you know, if the name is, for instance, recommended by the public and not land per se, but say Kevin Park comes up and says, I would like this name to be considered for a future facility. The committee, HLC, and also the ethics committee would say, does that meet our criteria? And then yes, we can add to the list. So could we write something in here that just says that any names that are proposed through a development deal would still also need to be vetted, or if they meet any of the criteria within the naming policy? So like you said, I own the property, but historically it was owned by somebody else. And if I owned it for 10 years, do I have a historic tie to the community, or 5 years versus the original owners that maybe owned it for 100 years? But so in that instance, if we were to write some either clarifying or specific language that ties it back to any donated land, would still need to also be considered as part of the policy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, because I would like to differentiate a city versus a private institution. And I would think, like, I would like to differentiate that, which private institutions, they're making money, people are making donations. Or, and thank you very much for the clarification. Thank you very much for the questions, because I feel like you kind of understand what I'm getting at. If people want to make financial donations for different things, they can name a bench. They could adopt a tree. They could do lots of different things. But I think that when it comes to a city street, when it comes to something that goes on the map that's tied to the city, it should go through city review. It should not be predicated on an agreement from the person that made a monetary donation or donated the land. I think that it should be a review because this is the city. This is not, Stanford University, Mission College. And I'm just saying that I think that there should be some guidelines there. So people who are coming to the city expecting to make donations, if they're expecting to make a donation and they're turned away because they don't get to have their name on it, then maybe that's a kind of donation that we want to reject. But I think that there needs to be something that not only gives guidance to the people making the decision, but gives guidance to people making, proffering names, properties, et cetera. Like before it becomes a problem, there should be some quid pro quo. There should be some things up front that say, these are our guidelines for your naming. And thank you very much for donating. We appreciate that, but the expectation. Yes. And I'm just saying that I don't know if, I just heard donation policy. That's what I want to know how it ties in with that.
I think it's important to let's all step back and realize that any recommendation that comes through this policy is going to land with the city council. Any donation of a facility, asset, and a name that would be attached would land with the city council. So the Section G, which referenced donations, was included in here to make it a allowable use embedded within the policy. We can also delete that because if the donation is approved by the city council at that time with whatever donation policy is in place can vet that issue. Nothing in this policy will take that ability away from the city council. I think if the concerning part in this policy is Section G, we could act, it's 9, I'm looking, it's 9. Right. 9, I was saying 9, I was looking at it upside down. So 9 is regards the donation. We can simply delete the reference, either all of 9 or the reference.
Either delete it or require that it be consistent with any donation policy or decision that the city council makes, so that it's preserved as a possibility, but it's guaranteed that it's consistent with an independent decision.
And again, I mean, a lot of people complain because I repeat myself, but I feel like there's a need to repeat myself. Again, I understand that the final decision is made by city council. I understand that. What I'm saying is there should be some guidelines that before things get brought to city council, so that city council doesn't have to make the initial, I mean, they could say, I could donate money, say I don't want it to be named after me. And city council could decide, well, we do want to name it after you. That's fine. But I think that there should be some guidelines that say, these are the expectations that you have as somebody who's donating, as offering land, offering money, that no, we will go through a process. And that process is look at historical significance. We'll look, at other things, right? And that, the fact that you donated, the person that donated land, money, et cetera, that's not going to be the highest consideration. I mean, again, I just want to know if we can put something in there that states that, because if we think that, I would like that to be part of the process, because I mean, I'm talking to 2 people here that very consistently tell me that if it's not in the process, then it doesn't exist. And I just want to make sure that these kinds of things, which are important to me, running a public city, are denoted somehow.
So my thought is, council member, committee member, that all the points that I hear you raising are valid ones. That's just a whole separate kind of body of kind of considerations and policy to be made that are kind of outside the scope of how we go about naming things. It really ties into legitimate considerations and concerns you have about whether people who donate to the city get to decide, independent of other processes, what those things get called. And I think that's a fair point and a consideration. It's not really taken up fully by this policy, and I think deserves separate consideration. The way to get this policy advanced, in my view, because it's got a lot of other different parts to it, not just this part, would be to make, 8 and/or 9 clearly subject to policies that the city council itself makes. And I get how those aren't before you now, but and those will ultimately need to come back, to you if that's a priority of this group to make that policy. But if we make these terms subject to those policies, nothing that you would say are concerned about happening, could happen without the city council ultimately deciding it, either consistent with the policy that it makes or consistent with the transactional decision the city council might make with respect to a particular donation. We don't have that policy right now, in my understanding, that prevents, or in fact discourages or directs, people who are making donations to go through a naming process, first. But again, I think this can be tailored to build that concept in, if in fact that's ultimately the decision of the city council to have it work that way.
And I understand that it's outside the scope of the discussion that we want to talk about and of the specific
Yeah.
changes that we'd like.
No,
to
it's a
make
fair
to the
point.
council.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I look at defining criteria and provide consistent procedures for naming proposals to the city streets, parks, and other facilities, and then you talk about donation, I would think that there would be a better defined donation policy, which would, report up to something like this. And to hear that there isn't really one, then it makes me a little bit more concerned. It makes it harder for me to accept this as it is. I mean, even with these ideas of, well, we will get to that eventually. Like looking at our governance and ethics plans, the things that we wanted to talk about for the last, in my case, almost 4 years, promises of we'll take a look at in the future aren't as easily acceptable to me or things that I really believe in. Again, I'm trying very hard not to turn down things I believe in to get something I do not want.
To the chair.
Sure. Yeah.
Meaning, I think it's a fair point to bring up. It's not fully developed yet. I would even say, well, before it comes back to me, please give me something that makes me feel comfortable that a public city will be treated differently from a private institution.
Question for Committee Member Park. I think you've articulated a number of concerns and philosophies around donations. But specific to this policy, your concerns are really around a donation that has a name attached to it.
I mean, there's more things than that. That's one. I said I have a couple of things. That's one point that we're talking about. It's not the only point.
Fair. No, I just want to.
But rather than look at this specific thing, you should say, oh, this is a point, and here's how, all these other things that have not been, voiced are related or are similar to that thing. Like I'd rather really rather not have to explicitly tell every single instance, every single possibility. I would like to voice a concern and see how that with a broad brush, how that concern covers other
And so
policy
committee
points.
member, what I'm trying to establish is a way to move forward or not, depending on where the committee would like to go. And I'm trying to understand your concern with regard to donations, because we're here today talking about a naming policy. And so you raised a number of concerns and issues around donations, and there are various policies around donations and practices that would not relate to naming of a facility at all. And so, as the city attorney has articulated, there's a couple ways to move forward. I proffered one, which is we take out any reference to donations in the naming rights policy, and we address concerns with donations, names, and otherwise separately. The city attorney has proffered leaving in the possibility of a allowable criteria or a name is being connected to a donation, but with the caveat that that would need to be consistent with other city council policies or donations. I think two ways to accomplish the same thing. A third way is to develop additional criteria around names associated with donations in this policy. And we can go back and do that. My concern with that is we would be putting criteria in this policy that any donation would go to the city council regardless, and the name will go to the city council regardless. And so I think to carve it out makes sense and just say the city council is the ultimate deciding body on any donations. If there's a name attached to that donation, that will be as per the donation policy and the city council's decisions at that point. And really just take that out of this process altogether would be my recommendation if that's I think the primary concern around the proposal as drafted.
You know, and I understand. I think that what I'm saying a little obliquely is like removing donations from this policy doesn't resolve the issue. Like we need to address it in the donations policy as well. Putting it there would say, well, this makes it consistent if it's, as long as the naming is consistent with our donations policy, as city attorney suggested, I think that would work. You know, we haven't actually looked at donation policy. And my question is, how do we reduce or remove the expectation that donations equal naming rights for public features? I mean, but the real question to me is, I want to differentiate public and private institutions at some point, right? Like I understand why private institutions take donations and offer naming, but I do feel that there is a difference between a private institution and the city, right? And at some point, I just want, it's a me want, a desire, I have a desire to differentiate. That people can't just go in and change the makeup of a city because they made a donation. And at some point, even donations of land or a house or a building, I think that those kinds of things should go through a review and should not be, that review should not be eliminated, superseded by the amount of money or by the property or by the people making the donation. I mean, these are the concerns that I have for, again, thinking from the city perspective, for a public city, not a private institution. At some point, I want to hear that there's a difference. I mean, I want to hear that. Maybe nobody else does.
And I think just very, very plainly, that's in the donation policy. And
but it would be in the donation policy.
It could be,
but it's not there.
It could be in a donation policy. And we're only talking about public assets. And then two, a future city council, whether it's in a council donation policy or not, can make a decision that you're articulating that you would be against. And so we can certainly create a robust donation policy, but that may not prevent the concern that you're articulating.
And it,
The city council, it would be a city council policy. And then if someone stepped forward saying, I'd like to make this donation, the city council could decide to waive their policy because they view that that donation is beneficial. I totally get that having a policy may still be better than no policy. I just want to articulate that the concern you're articulating, and I don't even know if it's ever happened in Santa Clara, may still happen because the ultimate decision body is the city council.
One additional thought as well, Chair, if I might. There's, and I appreciate the thought about not wanting to create the expectation, right, with policy urges people to decide it's okay for them to condition a donation, right, with the naming requirement. There is actually language already in Section 9 that's kind of a potential expectation adjuster at the end of it, which says, although a geographic or characteristic name is preferred, that could be expanded, right? Although a historically significant or geographic, name would be preferred. May, in the meantime, if you're comfortable proceeding with this with caveat language regarding, needing to be consistent with whatever other policies that are developed, that could be, Committee Member Park, a mechanism for adjusting people's expectations. It already talks about a geographic or other name be preferred. We could add historic name, to that concept. So just another way of getting at what you're commenting on, that already a kernel of which is already in the draft policy that's in front of you.
Okay, Member Park. Member Chahal has some comments, as do I, so we need to make sure that we get to everyone.
I will defer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I think on the same topic, I think the confusion is between donation policy and the naming. So if we segregate that, all donations to be accepted by the city will be as per the donation policy. And if there are strings attached to donation policy for naming, asking for naming rights, that will be referred to appropriate policy. I think that can be as simple. That's my suggestion.
I have a number of comments. First, I agree with Member Park that I don't want to have the corporatization of Santa Clara, have every ball field named after some major multinational corporation. And it's like that old movie Rollerball, where everything was named after some corporation. In any case, so I'm very conscious of that, and that's why I think this preference of geographic or characteristic name is appropriate. Everything here is a guideline. The council, because this is a council policy, the council can override it at any time. The only way to prevent that would be to put it into the charter. But that would be an extreme step in my mind. Humans are very egocentric, egotistical. If you want to get a donation, attaching a name to that donation makes it much more likely, which is why almost every building on every university campus is named after somebody. It really does encourage the donations by people if you allow them to attach their name. We have the right to refuse the donation if it came from Kim Jong-un. I'll just give you an example. Marshall Cottle Park in San Jose was donated by Lester Cottle towards the end of his life. It's 100 acres. It's worth over $500 million. And that park is called Marshall Cottle Park. It's a tremendous asset for the residents of San Jose. The Master Gardeners have their main facility there, but he could have made a $500 million for his family if we decided to name it after somebody else, you know, so there is incentive or if you want these donations. Now, the council also has, donations are a curse. We could get a historic building donated to us that then costs millions of dollars of ongoing upkeep and such. So, you know, the council has the right to reject a donation, but if you want to name something after somebody, you're much more likely to get a donation. And that should be a consideration. But I don't like the corporatization of Santa Clara. I like the Santa Clara feel. It's named after local luminaries and such. But, you know, we're in this predicament or situation right now where we are looking at getting naming rights for a bunch of facilities, like our convention center and, you know, potentially the youth soccer park or, you know, other things where they have some value outside of Santa Clara because people come to those sports facilities and they see this name. So a corporation that wants to advertise there will get their name out much more. It might be covered by the news media and, you know, just like Levi's Stadium. Okay. Levi's is giving us over $150 million for the naming rights of Levi's, but would say some weapons manufacturer decide to double that? You know, everything's in the gray area, which is why it's here at the Governance and Ethics, right? Do I want to take twice as much money from someone that doesn't represent the values of Santa Clara or something? Everything is in the gray area, which is why Governance and Ethics has such a hard time of trying to decide on these policies. So I'll just give you one more example of egotistical nature of this is my alma mater. I went to a lecture and they were saying, we have a heck of a time trying to get people to donate to support physics graduate students. But if we want to have them name a building, we can get hundreds of millions of dollars for that. But if you support a graduate student, you're not going to get your name on anything. So that's just how the world works. And we have to decide, you know, if we're going to shop around naming rights to the convention center, who are we going to allow? And we do have an investment policy for the city of Santa Clara, and we could potentially tie naming rights to our investment policy that would then, you know, prohibit us from taking money from certain lines of business. But then the last question I had was, and this has come up in predominantly the southern part of the United States where we have an individual, something was named after them. They become discredited for some actions they took during their lifetime. Do we want to consider how we proceed with renaming something for somebody who has been discredited, and what is the policy? I'm not a fan of renaming everything because you'd hit almost all the US presidents if you did that. So, but we, you know, that is something to consider.
Chair Jane, in the renaming portion of the policy, it speaks to individuals or later found to be in violation of the city's ethics, mission, vision, and value. Yeah. So there's a caveat to that in here, and then it would go through the.
Yeah, and
like
that's
a
even under
deaccessioning.
existing policy. So it is thought about because you're right, that happens all the time and happened to my alma mater recently. That Bolt Hall was renamed Berkeley Law for just that reason.
Exactly. So those are my comments regarding, you know, sometimes you're really trying to attract some investment. So you do want to have a corporation be involved in naming. But it should be sort of on a limited
application. Not everything should be named after corporations. Thank you. Birch Park.
Yeah, again, when I talk about other issues, postmortem was another one of these things, which is I like finality of postmortem, finality of significance, some time to review. I mean, we have people that very famous, very beloved, and if we had named something after them 10 years ago, it would have been seen very well. But today, there's a lot of change of opinion there. I would like a finality of significance to be done after their body of work is completed. Meaning I like things to be done after. And I understand there were some things in here about, oh, somebody passing away and things like that. I think that's fine. I think there's lots of ways to memorialize people, things, events without making it a public, very busy day. Without naming something permanent. I'd like to make this something a temporary thing, some smaller thing, a bench, a tree, something. And then if time after, we decide that we'd like to name something more significant, then that would go through another review. But I feel that money, emotions, a lot of things cause us to make decisions that we may regret in the future. I also have been trying to stress, I understand council gets to make the final decision. And I hear about expectations and, because I want to remove expectations. I want to reduce expectations. It's not to say that we can't or won't accept a donation with naming rights. We may decide that even though there were no naming rights associated with this, because of the type of donation it was, we want to put your name on it anyway. But at some point, it's not just about removing expectations. It's also about giving the public grounds to protest if there is. But if the answer is, well, there's nothing that goes against it. There's, we hear what you say, but there's no, you have no basis for disagreeing. I think that's a very bad thing. I think that's a very big erosion of what I would consider a public entity like a city. Like if this were an institution, Stanford tore down one of the major buildings. I mean, now if I go there, I want to tell people where I did a majority of my studies, I can't because it's a lake. I mean, it's a park area. So, I would like to see a little bit more guidance on other things, donations. Again, we're a city. I would like to think that there's a difference between a city and, a for-profit institution. I will hold my other comments.
City manager.
Or three quick points. Just want to note that the guideline to allow a facility to be connected to a naming rights agreement is existing. That was in your prior modifications to the policy. And as you know, we're seeking naming rights for the convention center right now. Item 9 is in regard to donations. And so I think that's been the core part of our conversation today. On an individual being deceased before a facility is allowed to be named after them. Important to note, we had that discussion at a staff level in preparing the amendments to you. Decided not to change it for a couple reasons. One, we recently had an instance where we had the police department wishing to rename a facility after a former employee. That former employee was living, and they wanted to actually rename it after them while they were still living. And so that policy was fairly urgent. I know it came to the city council and was ultimately approved. And really it was, does someone have to be deceased before you give them their flowers? And so the current policy allowed it, and we chose not to change that. Certainly, also within the policy, there's the ability for renaming of a facility and that criteria that's in here, and council would also otherwise have that right. On that, I actually just want to note that a few years ago, I was traveling to Montreal, and there was a public plaza, and I really liked how they addressed a controversial monument. They actually put up another monument on the opposite side of the plaza, and then they had some plaques and essentially said, this guy was a bad guy, here's what he did. This guy was a good guy, here's what he did. I just personally really like that, because when you erase your history, you sometimes forget it. And so, should we ever come to that point, I think while the policy talks about renaming, the council and the community would have other options to address a potential controversial figure.
Hey, Member Park.
Yeah, and again, like I would try to differentiate earlier, and I can tell you where I try to do it, trying to differentiate naming rights for things that are for the express purpose of trying to generate money, right? And in those cases, they usually come with something like guidelines and timelines. And because it's for the express purpose of making money, sometimes those timelines, they can be renewed. You can take that and you can sell it to somebody else. There is the expectation that is there. That's not the same thing as saying, well, I want to pay money so that this street can have my name on it, or some facility can have, things like that. For the living deceased policy, like I understand that there are a lot of people we would like to commemorate, and we don't put people in the Hall of Fame before their careers are over, right? And some people, they will, maybe they earn a place in the Hall of Fame before their careers are over, but they still have to wait their time. And I don't like the time pressure associated with having to make a decision or naming somebody who is still living, right? Again, I have no problem with that if people propose a name and it goes on the list and their name happens to be, pulled from that list. But I just don't like when decisions are forced upon you or put upon you with timelines. I don't like being held hostage to a schedule, which is why I don't like things that come to us last minute on council. And I don't like things that are brought to us with high emotion when they don't have to be. One of the reasons I'd like to change these policies is to remove the expectations, to remove the pressure, the stress, the emotion from these kinds of decisions, because these should be decisions for long-term for a public institution. And again, I feel that we're not looking at the significance of what it means to name a feature. We're looking at it as just a thing that we do. And I feel that what you name things, we talk about it here, they are significant. People remember, they grow up knowing things by their names. And if that's the case, then I just would like there to be a little bit more thinking on what happens, to name, we have a couple of institutions that were named after companies that no longer exist, right? Is that historical? Well, now it is. But at some point, I'd like to think that the city isn't about fad. It's about, anyways, it's much more than that.
You manage.
Sure. Through the chair, I think a couple last comments to move us along. One, item 8 talks about naming rights. I think I've heard all 3 members of the committee not express an issue with that. But the concerns really have been around item 9, which is donations. My recommendation is we simply delete item 9 as a allowable criteria in this policy and allow that to be vetted and discussed through the city council and donation policies. I totally understand the comment by having it in here may have people that look to this policy seek to make a donation and place their name on it. And so if you want to avoid the corporatization or to discourage that, I think eliminating it as an allowable use in the policy is totally fine, right? And we will address that in due course through the donation policy.
I just want to be clear with that to interject. That provision really only talks about a donation of land, or facility. It's not a donation of money. So I get what you're saying, but as it's drafted right now, it only would apply to an actual donation of property, not here's money. I want you to name something after me.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. What was envisioned here is purely a facility or property. Certainly, conceivably, someone will say, here's $1 million, find something to name after me. Again, I think we can address that through the council donation policy, and just take donations out of here as a way of discouraging it. Also, I want to just say that, know that staff took this very, very seriously and dedicated a lot of time to this and wanted to incorporate things that we're doing through the HLC as a part of this, as a way to having a comprehensive policy. Council member or committee member Park, you mentioned concern around something coming with urgency and the council being pressured. Know that if that's a concern, my recommendation would be you can consider deleting the portion in this policy that allows the organization, i.e. the city manager, to bring forward a option. Now that was put in there explicitly because there have been instances where something urgent came up and it went directly to council. If you wanted to avoid that, I think removing that clause would be where you would do that. Now, also next to that clause is the allowance for the city council to bring something through a 030, which would be allowed anyway. This was putting that in there was just having a more comprehensive policy. But if you're really concerned about something coming directly to council and want to avoid that, it would be removing those sections.
Okay, I'd like to go to the members of the public to comment on this, and then we can have some motions. Any member of the public?
There are no hands raised online.
Okay, are there any motions to amend staff's recommendation or to approve them?
Chair, if I may make one other point that city manager and I were talking about, that was part of the discussion. Part of the consideration also might be whether or not the committee wanted to recommend that the Governance and Ethics Commission be inserted between HLC and the city council in consideration of the naming of streets. This policy doesn't change that. If you wanted to propose that, that would require an ordinance amendment, but that could certainly be something that you recommend if you think, as part of the consolidation process or otherwise, Governance and Ethics is a logical intermediary body for all the recommendations without that unique provision from the with respect to the HLC. So also for your consideration as part of your deliberations, wanted to make sure that didn't get lost. You don't have to do that, but I know it was talked about.
I think there's a question in my mind. We used to have a thing called the Architectural Review Committee, and it consisted of 3 council members, and they would approve variances and such. But then their rulings could be appealed to the city council. And then there was a due process issue where you've already ruled on something, now you can't sit and rule on it again. That doesn't apply because these are only advisory, is that correct?
I think that's right. That provision wouldn't, this is really the city making decisions for itself as opposed to you and setting up a structure for that as opposed to acting with respect to a permit that a private party is being requested. So those due process considerations aren't as material in this context as they would be there.
Okay, very good. Member Chahal?
Just a quick comment. I know we are talking about naming rights for like Levi's or Convention Center. I think we should make it clear that that type of business contracts do not fall into this type of a naming policy. Because those are negotiated contract and those are short-term contracts, 5-year, 2-year, 10-year, 15-year. They should not be part and part of this policy. Clearly, yeah, Karwa. Because after 10 years, the convention center or the Levi Stadium can go to anybody else. And then we don't want to meddle around with it.
Yeah, I think what we've heard too, if I might, Mr. Chair, is that with respect to both that provision and the donation provision, we're basically probably going to say something that neither of those circumstances are governed by this policy, that instead will be governed by separate, policies and procedures adopted by the council.
That's
Member Park?
Yeah, Dad, do you have a question? So again, I do like the removal of item 9. I mean, it does still imply that there's a little work to be done in the donation policy, but that would at least mitigate some of my concerns because it's explicit in item 9. The question I have with HLC is, again, we have an ordinance. It's just an ordinance. So anything created by ordinance can be repealed by ordinance. But previously, HLC decided they wanted to name a street, something with significance. They would go directly to council. But if Parks and Rec wanted to name a street, for example, or a park, they would go through the naming ad hoc committee, and then it would go to council. That's the previous process. Okay, so okay, now it would come here because we are basically the amalgam of the 3 different committees. I really don't like taking away the powers of HLC. I do like a little bit of consistency. There is that phrase, a foolish consistency, and I think the word foolish is often dropped from the phrase, but a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And I'm trying to think about what the foolish consistency here would be. I do like the ability for people to weigh in on something as significant as a name. If it's significant enough that Parks and Rec needs to review and have an open review before it goes to council, I would think that would be true of anything historically significant. That said, I considered that HLC, the meeting where they come up with the name, they're not going to offline decide to bring it to council. They would have a meeting within HLC itself, and that would be the time to do it. So I don't know that, adding a third review for the public would be a more intelligent consistency. Yes.
Through the chair, there's a change in this policy to what HLC does, and that's adding 2 or 3 options. And so having it stop here before going to council will provide a vetting of HLC's recommendation and ideally 1 recommendation that would go to the city council. So I just wanted to articulate that. In addition, if memory serves me correctly, names from HLC have gone to the city council on consent. And so having another vetting of those and another public meeting here before they go to the city council will provide more input and allow this body to grapple with if there's any concerns with one of the names that is being recommended. You can discuss that issue here and then forward on a single recommendation to the city council. Of course, with all the backup information that you received and the rationale for the recommendation.
Because that does change my mind. Meaning that the item isn't usually on consent. It does change my mind, and I would like things I like the discussions to be explicit versus implicit. That's my preference. And then for the removal of recommendations from city manager or even authority requests, I feel that I don't like that. I don't like removal of avenues, but if the review goes through the same process, whether it comes from city manager or a council member or anybody, if it goes through the same process, I don't have a problem with that as much. All right, I just don't like removing that possibility.
So those were explicitly for expedited issues. And so it would go from the manager to the council or from
Directly
the
to council.
council through 030 through the council. So in very unique circumstances.
Director Sparacino, did you want to? You were sort of eager
I
to.
was like thinking what he was saying, what city manager was responding to. And the other way would be through the normal, any other names brought forward, not in an urgent matter, would go through the normal channels.
Do we have any motions?
I'll try. So accept staff recommendations, but as dwelled, take out the donation part of it, make it a separate process for donation approval. And if the strings attached about naming rights, that will be a separate process to that. And also take out explicitly naming rights for any business contract we sign, just like a long-term business contract. They should not fall under this naming rights. So other than that, I say accept staff recommendation on this,
Okay, so,
unless
well,
Councilor Park has some changes.
Second or amendment or?
I want to amend. But I want some discussion. So I would like the recommendations from HLC, city manager and city council to go through review. I would like it to go through the same process. And to me, expedited means that we wouldn't think about something unless it was brought to us. Expedited is, well, now I want to explicitly bring it to you. And so it would go through a process. The fact that we have a meeting schedule that would not necessarily support a quick process, well, that's a different issue. And that's an issue that I'll sort of try to talk about when we go through, we'll talk about other things, but I would like to suggest, and I'm encouraging discussion for HLC, city manager, city council, for all requests to go through a standard vetting process. Right. And if it needs to be expeditious, then perhaps we can call a special meeting, but I would like it to go through. Yes.
Yeah.
City manager.
My recommendation, if that's the case, is that if it begins with the city manager or council 030, it come to governance and then go to council. Otherwise, there's no reason to have that process because it would always begin at Parks and Rec or HLC. And so it would be changing the ability for the city manager or a 030 to go straight to council and have that go straight to governance, because we can, for an urgent item, we can get 2 or 3 council members together fairly quickly.
Attorney.
Accept and understand that, to be clear on what Member Park's proposing is that in addition, that an HLC recommendation on streets that previously went to city council directly, you now are asking that go through governance. And I think Member Chahal might have intended that anyway as part of his initial motion. Yeah, very good, understood. And that will require, that recommendation would include a recommendation to the council to amend or at least clarify the ordinance so that there's no misunderstanding that it's HLC directly to council.
I'll accept that
Understood.
change, but on the 030, so basically we are not amending 030 because 030 is only for the council. So we'll have to start a process, rename something else, basically. Okay.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we can vote on this motion from Member Chahal.
Yes.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Okay. Passes unanimously.
With the understanding that we'll make these changes and it can now go directly to city council.
Correct.
Doesn't need to come back. Yeah, very good.
And again, I just want to clarify for the public that the change to HLC was not to reduce HLC's importance, but to give the public the same number of opportunities to talk about a naming issue as they would through any other means or mechanism.
Okay, so that concludes item number 2. We go on to a staff report. Any reports from staff?
No reports from staff, but I just want to circle back on our discussion today about the donation policy. And even without committee guidance, we will gather donation policies and submit them to this committee for review and future discussion.
Okay, committee member reports, referrals, anything from, okay, I have one. Go ahead, Member Park, go ahead. Okay. I achieved a milestone this last week. I received my 200th PRA from James Rowan. And that's in, just a little over 4 years. If we were to estimate the staff costs and everything of a PRA to be $100, that would be $20,000 of expense. I think that $100 is fairly conservative in that. And so, that's all I have to say about it. Hey,
Yeah, I got
Member Park.
Yeah, I mean, going to PRA, I've had some discussions with city manager as well. But I feel that we do need an AI policy. We do have a longstanding PRA that is being used to, purportedly train AI. I think that there needs to be an AI policy, not just internal for staff use and use for city business, but I also feel like there should be some guidelines for even council use. I mean, this is making a little bit of headlines right now, but my understanding was that if people are using GPTs, if they're using AI for city business, that those queries were also PRA-able, as potentially are the outputs, because the outputs, can and do change. But again, I feel like there needs to be, Chair Jane's talking about PRAs. I mean, we've all been subject to PRAs, and we all been subject to PRAs from a specific person. I feel that at some point, there is wording on reasonable and other things, which aren't going to hold too much water for the California PRA expectations. But at the same time, I feel that internally we need to have some avenues where we can ask, what is this used for? I mean, for the AI request where somebody's asked for the all communications between council members and the public for all, at some point, I do understand that the public has the understanding that their interactions may be PRA-able. In fact, some people explicitly send in comments to council because they know it's PRA-able. But I don't know that they have the understanding that their comments can be used in a public tool. I mean, we had this question of, well, what's the difference between a GPT response that's trained on copyrighted materials versus a search? And the difference is the search shouldn't give you the answer circumventing the source. It should take you to the source, whereas GPTs don't necessarily do that. I think that if those cases are true, if people are quoting you, that's one thing. If people are using your work, including your words, to create a new work, then that's slightly different. That's a different type of use. And I feel that at some point, if we're going to talk about governance, we're going to talk about ethics, we do need to consider what that means, because I certainly don't want my words taken out of context by a GPT, because GPTs don't quote you, they're GPT, it's in the name, it's generative. It will generate. often taking a majority of your words, it will generate output based on the training material. And I think we need some guidance there. And because of that, I also think that we need some guidance even on council for how AI, especially generative AI, is used in, in our line of work. I mean, the other question is, a lot of tools cache or store information, store queries, and they may say, we don't store this, we will get rid of it later, but terms of service change all the time. And if a company, 23andMe, for example, goes bankrupt and its data is purchased by another company, what are the expectations that we would have of the data that we formerly thought would be secure? If people are using GPTs, public tools, even for private use, to summarize closed session materials and things like that, what are the rules that govern something like that, and how would we know? I think at some point we should have something that says this is what we allow, this is what you should not do, and if people want to disregard that, they're disregarding something as opposed to doing whatever they're allowed to do. I would like all of these things to be considered.
I'd like to
Chair, there's a
respond to
lot
that.
there.
There's a lot there.
And combines a few things, all of them good, important things to consider. I know there's policy being developed, around AI. I know we're reviewing the PRA process and looking both at artificial intelligence as a tool for us, and with some of the implications that Member Park has raised, and I've talked to him a little bit about that. With respect to contracts with other parties and with management of information that they get from us, that is also an evolving topic. There are in our contracts very explicit, provisions currently about how things need to be stored and who controls that information and what happens to it on the expiration of contracts. I know I had a lot of that, and we spent quite a bit of time in my previous city, on developing standards for that. I think that's part of an ongoing process too, to make sure those contractual provisions keep up with this constantly evolving, technology. So a lot of those things are in play in different ways. In terms of the internal AI policy and all the different tentacles of that, I'll refer to the city manager, noting that we're a little off topic, and I know you need to adjourn the meeting, but at least some brief opportunity to respond.
Sure. Really quickly. I know the council members know that we have an internal staff working group looking at AI in various fashions and working on an internal AI policy, as well as something outwardly facing. I think Councilmember Park, we've had a number of discussions about the PRA and some of your concerns. And so one of the things that we can do as an initial step, because a number of the concerns around the PRA and use of AI by outside parties involves legal analysis. We can add to our disclaimer on all city emails and actually provide the city council with language in your signature panel that will alert people who you're communicating with that the contents of their email may be subject to PRA and may be used for generative AI purposes. We can at least provide that forewarning. And so we can, I'll go back and talk to our IT staff and about that. With regard to a city council policy on AI, just want to remind the committee that one of the things that will come onto staff's work plan as an internal task item is taking a look at all of your council policies. As you know, you have very discrete policies, and collapsing those into one city council policy and procedural manual that will include a review of, okay, what policies do we have? What policies can we combine, and what new policies do we want to add and delete, right? And so I think having a city council policy on AI use could be something that we add when we do our comprehensive review. And with all of that, just want to caution that, sometimes council policies it's hard to control the behavior of others through council policies, but we can certainly set guidelines.
Okay.
You can set guidelines.
I'm trying to catch an airplane, but Member Park, do you have a brief comment?
Do I ever have a brief comment?
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to make my comment. So Maria had informed me that if we look at our upcoming agenda for the September 8th meeting, we had one item on the agenda today and we went 2 hours. And I'm sorry to the public for that. Looking at September 8th, we actually have 4 or 5 items, depending on how you look at it. And I think that we might need an extra meeting to be able to cover that. Maria suggested something maybe in August. And that would be very close to the September 8th meeting, but I think we have to have a second meeting. So just to make people aware that we should schedule a second meeting. Is that committee members? Okay.
And that was my point. My point is we have collapsed 3 different committees. And it's really 2 plus some extra work by the naming ad hoc committee. But I feel perhaps we do need to have more meetings. We need to think about the organizations that we comprise now, that we have taken over, look at what kind of schedules they required, and then come up with a schedule for this new committee that covers the work of the previous committees. I don't know that that's true, today. I remember when we had 4 or 5 items on previous agendas, and even if we had an estimation of this should take half an hour, if it took half an hour, it would have taken over 2.5 hours for even that agenda. And each one of those items, if you looked at it, some of them were going to take more time. And the fact that you put those items on the same agenda it didn't make any sense to me. When it comes to AI, I mean, you cannot warn people who are sending you an email in advance that, oh, what you just sent me may be used for training, rather than a disclaimer that is sent out after the fact. When we respond to it, that it may be used. I would rather see something that's more like a denial of consent to be used for training, which is, there's nothing that's going to prevent us from responding to a PRA, but responding to a PRA and being used for training of AI, I think that there should be standard language for denial of consent to be used for GPT training, right? If they want to ask for the PRA, then I'd rather that they did that. But if it's going to be used for something that's generative, my answer is we should really look at how we can say no to that. We're not trying to go around PRA. We are trying to limit a potentially bad use of the information.
And not,
The attorney, we're
yeah,
little
I
off
think we're,
topic here.
yeah, I think we're off topic, so.
No, but I'm just saying, this is something I'd like to consider. This is not something I'd like to discuss now.
I
This
want to
is something-
discuss it.
Yeah.
Yes, we know we have the AI workforce. I know the city attorney has task force. The city attorney has said we're working on this.
Not my task force, but I'm part of the task force.
So, okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned. All vote 2.
Sorry, we do have one hand raised. Wanda, did you?
Oh, okay, we'll
Sorry.
take the public comment.
Wanda
Wanda?
Buck, Wanda Buck, PDQ, GPT, PRA, AI, IT. You guys are hard to follow. I looked up some of them and I know some of them. And maybe it would just take too long and increase the meeting. But from a citizen's point of view, it's hard to view. But thank you for everything you've addressed today. I really appreciate the extra time needed for you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Wanda.